In this presentation, we will look at the dress form movement during the Victorian era. We've seen examples in other presentations of how individual women ignored or adapted clothing to suit their own needs and beliefs. We've also looked at how the artists and intelligentsia objected to what they considered gauche and exploitive taste in fashion. These illustrations are from Punch magazine, a widely read cultural journal at the time, satirizing the ways that fashion remade the female form. We will look at 3 additional social movements that object to current fashion for slightly different reasons. The first is the dress reform movement, called rational dress in England. These social activists advocated for legal and social equality for women. Professional women were beginning to make a mark during this era, and the first wave of feminism begins, agitating for women's votes. There were also coalitions of religious groups, such as the Seventh-day Adventists, Quakers, and the Oneida community in New York State, that did not believe in distorting the human form. Some dress reform proposals were extreme and others quite subtle. The subtle forms were probably more widely adopted by real women than we think, as history loves to record the more extreme examples. The general push to eliminate the number of layers and garments that women wore will be generally successful by the time we approach World War I. The dress reform movement in America begins in the 1850s when Amelia Bloomer introduced Turkish trousers. She was a pioneering suffragist, newspaper editor, and fashion advocate. After noticing that women's health and well-being were affected by restrictive corsetry and yards of fabric that wound around women's feet, she pushed for women to adopt pantaloons, now called bloomers, after her. This style of dress was worn by some radical women, but it was ahead of its time and attracted widespread ridicule by conservative men and women. Photographs do record that women wore several variations of the bloomers. The woman at the left is wearing the Turkish trousers. The other 2 women appear to be wearing straight-legged trousers without the full blousing effect around the ankles. From the 1850s to the 19-teens, there will be continuous attempts at dress reform from many sides, with the mainstream press making fun of the anxiety this causes. They clearly feared that if women did not dress in an extremely feminine manner, then they must be masculine, jeopardizing the privileged place men inhabited. The second movement that objected to mainstream fashion came from activists in health or hygiene reform. These groups avoided the socio-political implications of scaring conservative people and addressed the issue of bodily damage caused by corsetry and elaborate fashions. They believed heavy layers of underwear and stacks of clothing sapped energy from the body, caused temperature swings of overheating, and attracted unhealthy debris that clung to the skirts in the streets. One such activist was John Harvey Kellogg, who founded a world-renowned health resort in Battle Creek, Michigan. The campus contained 30 buildings, including a research facility and hospital. Kellogg treated all manner of ill health with diet reform, including ideas such as low-fat and high-protein foods, with an emphasis on whole grains and fiber. He also believed that healthy people required fresh air and exercise. It's hard for us to imagine a time when this advice was considered cutting-edge science. Many of his beliefs are still promoted today, and the breakfast cereal he invented for his patients is still with us. Battle Creek adopted a healthy way of dressing, promoting more common-sense items of underwear, such as a union suit or leggings. The dress on the bottom right is a plainer dress style without corsetry and featuring the natural waist. The Battle Creek dressing system was based on the work of another activist, writer Annie Jeunesse Miller. She was a pioneering clothing designer and an advocate for dress form. Her main goals were to advocate correct principles of physical development and dress for women. She wanted to educate groups of men and women about the importance of hygiene and health to prevent the spread of diseases. As a lecturer, she spoke about human rights, arguing for equality. She believed that in fashion, novelty, exaggeration, and display have been the ends sought. The body has been cramped and distorted. The fundamental laws of beauty have been violated. The JENNESS Miller system devised a number of clothing items. We see several here. On the left, we see a soft corset and long underwear suit sewn all in one garment. This eliminates the stacks of garments women wore. On the right, we see a bodice with no bones. The seams and construction provide the support. This is called a freedom waist. The freedom waist is a corset substitute with several styles and philosophies. All three of these styles feature the chemise-like section that is actually sewn into the bodice to create more of a close-fitting blouse. The waist was not compressed and the bust not pushed up. Hygienic principles promoted support from the shoulders, equally distributed strain. The backs were soft, so growing bodies such as young girls would not be deformed by years of wearing them. In England, Dr. Gustav Jaeger's system of sanitary woolen clothing was promoted as a healthy alternative to layers of dressing. It claimed that pure animal fibers temper the swings of cold, heat, and dampness. He believed vegetable fibers such as cotton allowed perspiration to pool on the skin. It was advertised to avoid illness, even acting as a guard against cholera. This system had a number of influential followers, including Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw. The Jaeger company branched out to making very high-quality outer clothing, and it is still in business today as Jaeger sportswear. The third reform movement was new opportunities for women, primarily promoted by the new educational opportunities for them. America will lead the way in women's education, and when women's colleges adopt vigorous sports, a new attitude about clothing follows. Women's colleges promote physical fitness as a new science, and women begin branching out to join social sports groups. Although competition in women's sports will be avoided for some decades as being unladylike, the health and self-esteem benefits were widely promoted. Colleges focused on sports like sleigh riding, skiing, boating, tennis, gymnastics, and eventually golf. Gymnastics and calisthenic drills were a large focus, as this was a non-competitive pursuit that everyone could agree was edifying. And this is how many women would be introduced to pantalettes or early trousers. When fashion reform was called for in the larger society, women turned to the suits they'd exercised in. The middle classes also adopt sports that require little equipment, such as lawn tennis or badminton. One did not have to belong to an exclusive club, but did have to have access to a lawn that could be mowed. Incidentally, the lawnmower is invented, and for the first time, we begin the idea of surrounding our homes and parks with clipped grass. The middle-class acceptance of sports will gradually add fuel to the fire of how well women should move in their clothing. In England, the Rational Dress Society held a design contest to promote and propose what women should wear for activities such as skiing, hiking, cricket, and calisthenics. In 1885, the pièce de résistance is invented, the safety bicycle. This is a cheap and fun form of transportation or exercise. This will create large ripples through society as roving bands of women cycling together changes the idea of women needing male escorts. This was a new freedom for women, and they could even meet a boyfriend in the park without the watchful eyes of parents. The bicycle, it was said, even ended the inbreeding that had been such a problem in remote villages, because now the villagers could cycle over to the next village in search of romance. Cycling in long skirts was cumbersome and dangerous, although many women did just that. The more adventurous women adopted cycling bloomers, also called the Knickerbocker suit. This was the first ever bifurcated garment acceptable in mainstream society for women in the history of European fashion. Soon this suit will be adopted for other sports, such as hunting. This fashion also promoted wearing tall button-top boots to cover the stocking and the leg. Between social reformers, health reformers, and the rise of educated women partaking in sports, the assault on corsetry was fairly effective. Sales began to drop, so much that manufacturers created sports corsets touted for their good sense. Some were made with mesh and lighter bones, and some, such as the one on the right, look an awful lot like the Freedom Waist created by JENNESS Miller and promoted by other health activists. After the Victorian era, we will see dress reform slowly adopted by mainstream fashion. I find it very interesting that in the 1970s, a corporation wanted to sell women cigarettes using the then current women's liberation movement as an incentive. This ad compares the struggle women endured to reform fashion to women buying a cigarette especially designed for them. The advertisement slogan was, "You've come a long way, baby."